Howdy, buen dia. Welcome back to Single Black Man from Des Moines. My name is Al Salmon Jr. A little about me: I was a dog handler in the service. I've worked in retail, healthcare, and libraries. I've taught Hapkido for over 20 years. I am currently single and retired from marriage. Now I'm a fledgling writer. From time to time, I'll read some of my pieces, both fiction and nonfiction. Time permitting, I'll tell some jokes that I've heard from the past. I like to keep these around 15 minutes. I'll post stuff every week, so please like, share, and subscribe, especially if you're on YouTube. If you'd like to purchase my works, I have some things over at Smashwords, or email me at SBM from Des Moines, that's all spelled out, at duck.com. And I'll send you a complete list and prices of all my works. If you order from me, I go through PayPal. If you need more payment flexibility, then go through Smashwords. Just be advised, not all my stuff is up on Smashwords. That being said, let me tell you a story. Today is a memoir. Today is about my father, and this story is called Pops. Pops. I come from a generation of getting spanked when I was a kid. My dad never spanked me, but he did make me cry once. I wanted some candy one day, and the smallest coin he had was a 50-cent piece. This was in the early 1960s, and you can get 2 pieces of candy for a penny. I'm sure Dad told me not to blow the whole 50 cents, but I did. When I came home, I had a small sack of candy. Not a Halloween-sized bag, but a respectable amount. Enough candy to have put me in a diabetic coma. Dad says, "No way am I going to eat all this candy." And he takes the bag from me, goes back to the store, and cashes in about 3/4 of the bag. I cried like he killed my dog, but I still ate the candy. Other than when I was a child, I never called my father Dad, Pops, or Father. When I talked to him in his later years, I never used any term of affection. I really didn't have any feelings for him. One would say I hated my mother. It wasn't that strong. Disliked, but never hated. Pops got off lighter because he wasn't there. And he seldom reached out or contacted us, and I mean my immediate family. Pops had kids with other women. I don't have a lot of memories of my father. Even as a toddler, I recall being reclusive. I remember one time he came upon me playing, and he wanted to join in. I was told I used to always wear a cowboy hat and a 6-shooter. I remember having a toy 6-shooter with a belt and a holster, and always had the hardest time putting the plastic bullets in the slots on the belt. I'm getting away from myself. Anyway, Pops wants to play with me. I remember getting bored with him because I wanted to play by myself. He'd feign being shot. I'm not sure of my reaction. I probably went along with it. Usually kids don't have a problem saying what's on their mind, especially if they want to be left alone. I guess I've always had a part of me to be empathetic and not to create waves. Part of this is due to being a tall black man in Iowa, be it at work or school. It would be hard pressed for me not to be the only black in the room. I'd smile and say hi, not to come off intimidating, and I always had a joke to share. Pops and my mom separated and eventually divorced well before I was out of elementary school. I don't really remember my parents arguing a lot. If so, maybe it was so frequent to notice, or I was too young. Once something bad happened between Mom, and she had to escape from Pops by running to a neighbor's house for refuge. There she called the cops. That was the only time I shed tears from my dad, watching him being taken by the police, him gesticulating vigorously in the back seat of a patrol car as it slowly paced down the alley behind my house. I think I let out a cheer when at the end of the alley he emerged from the patrol car. Again, this was the early 1960s. Nowadays, and I'm writing this in early 2018, We wouldn't be surprised if a cop had busted open a black man's head back then, or worse. I remember telling friends later that Pops had to be talking much shit to get out of that police car unscathed. Upon reflection and years of living with Mom, I knew how harsh a tongue she had, and that by no means excuses violence toward her. I could understand why he'd want to give her a lick. I don't think he ever hit her, nor do I recall her ever saying that he did. However, that day she had to run in fear for her life. Pops was imposing. He was taller than my 6 foot, broad-shouldered, thick in frame, but not obese. He was not a learned man. Mom told me he left school around 6th grade. Yet, as an adult, he often got work as a supervisor. In the supervisor, he achieved some rank and showed leadership qualities. Once we were lounging in bed and I was reading a DC comic. I had a word I couldn't pronounce and asked, "Daddy, what is this word?" He looked at it and a moment later says, "Olutra." It wasn't until later, while discussing the comics with my friends, I was told, "You idiot, that's Ultraman." And I thought then, "Thanks, Dad, you made me look like a fool to my friends." I guess he was a womanizer, and I'm assuming that was part of the reason they got divorced. Among my most vivid memories from childhood was accompanying my mother to one of Pop's paramour's houses, her pounding and screaming at the door and yelling profanities. Mom once told me to be careful whom I dated because I could never be sure if it would be one of my sisters. Perhaps my only regret of not growing up with my father was not having him as a mentor when it came to dating and girls. A side note, Mom had no clue how I was coming across to girls my age. Even though she gave me permission to subscribe to Playboy due to my lack of dating, she once asked if I even liked girls. I blurted out, "Yes, I like girls, but they don't like me." She really didn't have any advice, so she'd go into support mode. She'd point out some attributes I had and say any gal would love to go out with me. But that wasn't the case, but again, I'm getting off topic. I mentioned to her before that during high school I got labeled an Uncle Tom. Again, not much she could do when some black girls I liked thought I was too white and the white girls I thought was too black. Anyway, thank God for Playboy. Once he knew that I enlisted in the Air Force, it made him easier to contact me. Through the Red Cross, he got a hold of my commander and embarrassed me talking to Pops in front of my commanding officer. And especially since it wasn't an emergency, the officer was not pleased. He wrote to me monthly. The letters were simple. He talked about relatives I didn't know. There was always a phone number I never called. Although I never called, I did reply to every letter. Once he came and got me. I stayed for the weekend. I blotted most of the time from my memory. I have a picture of me and him together around that time, and you could tell by my facial expressions that I was not enjoying myself, and I was probably just putting up with him. He was prone to drinking and driving. I wasn't quite 20 at the time. However, he let me have some beer. Once he had some business in Marshall. He lived in Longview, so of course there were some beers in the car. One was a leftover can. He asked me to dump it while he was inside City Hall. I won't say that I had ADHD, but sometimes I did things without thinking. I was aware of a man whom I later found out was a sheriff, was on the steps of this office building Pops had gone into. He was talking to another man, and I didn't think that I had caught their eye. Silly me decides this would be a good time to dump that beer. The man speaking to the sheriff spies me and points me out to the sheriff. The next 20 minutes, I'm getting bitched out and threatened to be put in jail. I was wearing my Air Force blues at the time, and he mentioned more than once if what I did would be okay on base. No need for me to mention that this part of Texas is not especially observant of civil rights. The Klan was known to be in that part of Texas. This was in the fall of 1973. I was scared to death and afraid of going to jail. Pops comes out during the tirade. He apologizes profusely and tells the sheriff that I was only doing what he had asked. Then the sheriff lays into Pops. With a warning, he lets us both go. Pops later attempts to apologize to make up for the situation, but I'm simmering. Fast forward 10 years. My younger sister was getting married, and she wanted him to give her away. Other than that, in an obligatory dinner, she didn't have any time for him. So I got stuck with him. Jezebel, my ex-wife-to-be, took an immediate dislike to Pops. I found their dynamic fascinating. She didn't disguise her contempt for him, but for me, she wasn't overt about it. Pops seemed oblivious to her, and if he had any thoughts about her, he didn't share them with me. We were going out to dinner one night, and he was sitting in the back seat of our car. Jezebel was riding shotgun. 2 young white girls were walking on the side of the road coming our way. Cute, I thought, but I was driving, I caught a good look, and with Jezebel nearby, anything more than that would be an argument later. From the back seat I hear, "If I was alone." Jezebel clucked her tongue in disgust. Later that night, she told me how embarrassed she was by the remark. Fast forward another 10 years. Pops and I talk regularly. He's not doing well. He has diabetes and was about to have a limb amputated. Truth to tell, I was thinking of having him live with me at the time. Not so much out of love or affection, just that it seemed to be the right thing to do. Of course, Mom wasn't having any of this. She forbade it and said if I invited him into my home, she'd have nothing to do with me. At this point, I was independent, so her threat landed on deaf ears. By this time, I had spells of months of not seeing or talking to her. Pop soon died. I never called him Dad. I nicknamed him What's His Name whenever we talked about him during my formative years. Once he'd gotten his limb amputation done, I had softened towards him. I would call without calling him first, or I would call without having him call first, I should say, and for his birthday, I'd send him flowers. Ironically, years earlier, he'd call me on my birthday just to let me know that it was his birthday. By this time, me and my mom were on the outs. In my conversations with Pops, he'd say that someone, Mom most likely, was lying about him. As the years went by, I did not find this hard to believe. Once during a tirade about Pops, I pushed back. If he was so bad, I began, why did you stay with him for 10 years? This went over like a lead balloon. I will say Mom does get some credit for raising 4 kids by herself. She also has to take the blame for all the damage she has done, as well as taking credit for the good, and more on my mother in another story. As the time I spent with Pops, he never beat me, never berated me, and never insulted me. Can't say that about my mom, but again, that's another story. And again, that concludes my memoir about Pops. Stop me if you heard this. This is going to be my joke for today. A Swedish gal goes into a bar. She goes up to the bartender and says, "I'd like to have a beer." And the bartender asks back, "Anheuser-Busch?" And she responds, "Fine, thank you. And how's your penis?" Okay, that's going to do it for me today, folks. Again, please like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to purchase my works, I have some things over at Smashwords, or email me at singleblackman.from-Des-Moines@duck.com, and I'll send you a complete list and prices of my works. If you want to support my work but don't like to read, please contribute at buymeacoffee.com/AlSimon4722, all one words. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get Al out of the ghetto, and I'm going to close with this. You load 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.